Hello and welcome all of you guys to our YouTube channel SimplifyX Analytics. Today in this video, I will be explaining you about macros in Microsoft Excel. So what are Excel macros? Excel macros are a way to automate repetitive tasks that you perform in Excel. For an example, say you are doing a series of formattings to a cell and you have to do this on a regular basis or like 3-4 times a day every day. Needless to say, this will take a lot of your productive time and it will be a very tiresome process, meaning you have to apply these formattings to the cell in a manual way. This is when Excel VBS or Excel macros come to your help. Excel macros automate these tasks so that once you have recorded the macro or once you have written the VBA program, you can execute all those manual tasks within a split second by a click of a mouse or hitting several keyboard combinations. That is why macros are so powerful and they are very frequently used tool among Excel power users. So in this tutorial, I will be walking you through recording a simple basic macro and I will explain you some basic concepts when it comes to Excel macros. Without further ado, let's jump into the works. Say for an example, you want to apply some formattings. To demonstration purposes, let's assume the cell of interest is D4 and we'll type some text in this Excel. Let's type Excel here. So let's assume you want to apply some formattings to this cell D4. In my case, I am making the text bold and making it italic and let's underline it as well and then add a fill color like a light green, right? So how many steps that I performed here? I made it bold, I made it italic and underline and added the fill color. That is 4 steps in total, right? Assume that this is a task that you have to do 3-4 times a day, every day. I mean, needless to say, that is a lot of manual work, right? So you have to perform this exact set of 4 steps each time that you want to get it done. This is why we are using macros to automate these kind of repetitive mechanistic tasks. So if we are to get it done using a macro, first we have to record a macro. There are ways other than recording a macro to get it done automatically. Like you can develop the VBA code related to these operations and you can execute that code as well. Those kind of stuff, that is the VBA programming part of things, we will get into in our later videos. But in this video, I will be explaining you how to get this done using Excel macros, basically recording an Excel macro, right? So in order to record a macro to get this done, first we have to have the developer tab here. I'm sure most of you will not be having the developer tab here if you haven't used macros ever, right? So to get the developer tab, what I'm going to do is I'm going to the file tab, click options, and then I go to the customize ribbon. Here in this dialog box, in the right hand side, if you scroll down, you can see the developer tab here. At the moment it is unticked, I will tick it and then I will hit OK. Now we have the developer tab. Developer tab is where our macros and everything related to macros are in, right? So here you can see there's a button called Visual Basic, there's macros and there's record macros and stuff like that. To get this done, I'm going to use the record macro option. Before that, I'm going to remove all the formattings that I did to this cell. I'll simply copy formatting from a neighboring cell. I'll use the format painter and I'll take everything back to square one, right? I will select this cell, that is the cell D4, and I'll go to the developer tab. I will hit record macro. Okay, cool. So now we need to give our macro a name. So I will highly suggest give this a meaningful name. Give format cells, and then for the shortcut key, I will give Control Shift F. Yeah, F for formatting. It's not mandatory to assign a shortcut key, but if you do, it will come in handy in the future. And also description. For now, I am not gonna give this a description, but if you are sharing this macro across your peers, across your work buddies or your friends, then it will be a good idea to give this a description. That way they will have an idea about the functionality of this macro even before executing it. So for now, I'm not gonna give any description to this. And there's another feature called store macro in. I will come to this in our later videos, but for the time being, you can use this workbook. If you view this drop down, there are options like personal macro workbook and new workbook. So personal macro workbook is somewhere you can store all your macros. That way, a macro that you create in this workbook will be available in your other workbooks as well. So that's a very cool functionality in Excel macros. But for this video, as we are still starting out, I'm not going to use that functionality. I'm going to use this workbook option, right? And then I'm going to hit OK. Nice. So keep in mind from this point onwards, meaning the moment that you hit OK in that macro window, Excel will be recording all your actions like a screen recorder. Technically, what it will be doing is it will be converting all your actions into the language that Excel can understand, which is the Visual Basic for applications, or VBA in short. So VBA is a Visual Basic is a programming language. It will convert all the actions that you perform into code. Cool. So let's perform our actions now. I have already selected this cell. Then I will go to the Home tab. I will make the text bold, italic and underline it. And then I will add the fill color light green. Nice. Now we have performed all the operations that you want to this cell. So I am going to stop the recording. I am hitting stop recording. Nice. Now we have recorded our first macro. Cool. So if you want to view the macro that you already just recorded, you can go to the macros option and it shows all the available macros in all the open workbooks. Not only this workbook, say if you had opened another workbook, it will show the macros in that workbook here. At the moment I have only opened this workbook, so it is only showing this format cells macro. And as you can see from these options, you can run this macro, even you can edit this macro, or if you need, you can delete this macro as well. The coolest feature in macros is they are really flexible. You can edit the macros in any way you want. You can improve the functionality. You can remove some of the tasks performed in the macro. So that is a really cool thing in Excel macros. But since this is our first video related to macros, I'm not going to overcomplicate things. I'm not going to make any edits to the macro that we already recorded. So I'm going to leave things as it is. I will cancel this. I just wanted to show how you can view the macros in your Excel workbooks. That's it. So now we have recorded our macro. Let's test the functionality of our macro, right? So there are a few ways to access a macro that you already recorded. My favorite way is to use the key combination. In this case, if we hit Ctrl+Shift+F, it will execute the macro. Or since you are in the baby steps of Excel macros, what you can do is you can go to the Developer tab, go to Macros and select the macro that you just recorded and hit Run. See, formatting's got applied in a split second. You did not want to perform those 4 steps manually. Let's undo everything. Okay. The other thing is, when you use macros, you cannot undo. That is a constraint in macros. So keep that in mind. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the format painter and remove the formattings in this cell. And then I'm going to use the key combination that we assigned. That is Ctrl+Shift+F. See, our formatting's got applied. But there's a catch to this macro. If you see, so now I have used D4. I'm going to remove all the formattings here. I'm going to use the format painter, remove the formattings. And let's say I have to apply these formattings to the cell H2. I'm going to write word, right? So I need to apply the same formattings that I applied to cell D4 to H2. So why not? Let's use the macro that we just recorded, right? So I'm going to move the cursor to H2 and I'm going to hit Ctrl+Shift+F. See, nothing happened to H2, but cell D4 got formatted. But that is not the intended functionality here, right? We needed to format the cell H2, but it didn't happen. Why is that? That is because of absolute references. By default, so there are 2 things called absolute references and relative references in Excel macros. By default, Excel uses absolute references. That is, it sort of hard codes the cell address into the macro. So if we applied the formattings to cell D4, it applies the formattings to D4 only. That's it. It hard codes that value. But there are some cases that we need to use the functionality of the macro that we created in other cells or cell ranges as well. In such cases, this is not helpful. So if you want your macro to be dynamic, this is not the way to go. We have to use relative references. Relative reference means it adjusts the actions based on active cell's position, right? Absolute references, it targets specific cell addresses. It sort of hard codes the cell addresses. But relative references adjusts its actions based on the active cell's position. Nice. So let's put this into action and see what is the difference, right? Now I'm going to record the same macro, but I'm using the relative references in this case. Nice. So I will go to the cell H2 and then I will hit use relative references and then I will start recording the macro. We'll give the name like format cells 2. And in this case, I'm going to give Control Shift S. Yeah, Control Shift S, right? Hit OK. And now it starts recording our actions. I'm going to bold the text, italicize, and it should be underlined as well. Instead of green, let's give something like a blue. I want the font color to be white as well, right? Cool. Nice. So now we have performed all the operations that we need on the cell, and then I'm going to go to the developer tab again and I'm going to hit stop recording. Nice. Now we have created our macro, our second macro using the relative references. Remember the first macro, we used the absolute, we don't have any option. By default, Excel uses absolute references. But in this case, I have used the relative references. Cool. Now let's test it, right? So I'm going to remove the formattings from here. So I'm going to hit Control Shift S. Let's see what happens, right? First, I'm going to move the cursor to H2 and I'm going to see what happens. Control Shift S. Nice. Our macro is working. It applied the functionality to the H2, all the formattings to H2. Now I can't undo. I want to remove the formattings. Nice. Now I'm going to type something like PowerPoint in cell G4 and I'm going to hit Control Shift S. See, it's fantastic, isn't it? It applies the formatting to any cell instead of absolute referencing. I'll type some random text here and I'll hit Control Shift S. It applied all the formulas, all the formatting to cell B7 because we use the relative references. That is the wonder of using relative references. So in conclusion, this is very subjective. Whether to use relative referencing or absolute referencing is depending 100% on your requirement. Sometimes this might be a headache. Sometimes using absolute referencing will be the best way to go with your scenario. So that depends on your choice and on your requirement. But I just showed you these two techniques because knowing these two techniques exist would come in handy when you are dealing with Excel macros. Okay guys and girls, last but not least, I'm going to tell you how to properly save an Excel workbook that you already have macros in. To do this, I'm going to go to the File menu. I'm going to select Save As. Once you select Save As, you are getting this new window. In this window, it's the usual drill as always. You can give the file name a meaningful file name. I'll name this as a first macro. Cool. Now since we gave our workbook a name, we can hit save. Let's hit save. See, this is where the catch is. Since we already have some macros stored in this workbook, Excel is alerting us we are gonna be saving this workbook in a macro-free format, that is the .xlsx format. If you want these macros to be available the next time that you log in, the next time that you open this workbook, we'll have to use a different format, right? So we'll hit go back and then I'm gonna select from this drop down Excel macro enabled workbook or .xlsm extension. This is very critical, guys. If you have any sort of a macro or a VBA code in your workbook, you should select this format. Otherwise, you are not going to be able to reuse that macro or the VBA the next time that you open the Excel workbook. So we'll select this format, the second option, Excel macro enabled workbook, and I'm going to hit save here. Nice. Now we have successfully saved our Excel workbook as a macro enabled workbook. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this workbook and I'm going to open my saved directory and I'm going to open this first macro.xlsm file. Okay. It says macros have been disabled. I will have to enable the macros. I'll select enable content here. Nice. So let's test the functionality of our macro. Since we saved it as a .xlsm format, we should be able to execute the macro again. Okay. So I'm gonna remove all the formattings from this cell. I'm gonna hit Ctrl Shift F. Perfect. See, now we have the formattings applied to our cell using the macro that we have created. So guys, that is how you properly save a workbook that you already have macros in as a macro enabled format. Remember the extension, that is .xlsm, not the .xlsx format. That is the typical default Excel file format. That is good for any workbook that is without macros, but if you have at least one macro in your workbook, you should use the .xlsm file extension. Cool. So now we have come to the end of our video. Today we discussed what is a macro in Excel, what are the things, what are some simple things that we can do with macros, what is absolute referencing, what is relative referencing, and how to properly save a Excel workbook that you already have macros in. I think you got a proper understanding about these concepts from our video. In our next videos, we are planning to discuss about Excel VBS, how to edit the macros properly, and how to perform some complex operations using macros and VBA code as well. So guys and girls, thank you so much for watching this video till the end. We really appreciate that. If you still haven't subscribed to our channel, please hit the subscribe button. And if you like this video, please hit like and don't forget to share this video among your friends as well. Thank you so much for watching. See you in our next video.